So Grant said that he can talk a long time. I've just come out of a career where we had 3-hour classes, so bear that in mind. I'm going to talk. Obviously, our talks coincide to some degree because of the theme of the retreat, but I'm going to talk about a couple of other odds and ends to it. So basically, going back to the worship service this morning, looking at the fact that nobody knows what love is, I really love that passage. It's easy to remember. It's the first one in Divine Love and Wisdom. But I want to just explore a few of those things. So basically, one of the reasons for the theme is because of Armistice Day coming up in a couple of days. And when I was in high school, we read a lot of Wilfred Owen poetry. And it really made a huge impact on me. I loved Wilfred Owen. And one thing that really stuck with me is the lines in this particular poem, lips are not so red as the stones kissed by the English dead. And that just always sort of stuck with me somewhat. And Wilfred Owen, of course, was killed in World War I. And his poetry lives on, and it describes the horrors of war that were there. And so it's with that in mind, to some degree, that we approach this subject of love. And I start off with the quote that by now is probably familiar with to you, that greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends or their friends. And this is just an important concept for us to share in mind, to keep in mind. But one of the questions is, do we really need a war in order to lay down our lives for our friends? And of course, we don't. War is not something that the Lord creates. It's a permission, which means that the Lord permits it against his will. If you read the definitions of war, the descriptions of war in the writings, it points out that it's full of murder and plunder and violence and cruelty. And nothing like that at all can come from the Lord. So is there a way of laying down our lives for our friends that avoids those kinds of external things? That we don't have to act out the physicality that, say, Wilfred Owen had to act out. So one of the questions then is, well, what do we do? And when we think of war and laying down our lives for our friends, there's this tremendous sense of as of self in the process. It seems like we are doing the work. And in fact, we are doing the work. We're designed specifically by the Lord to have the sense that we are doing all this work ourselves. The reality, of course, is that when we're making the sacrifices that require us to lay down our lives for our friends, it's not us who's doing it, it's the Lord who's doing it. He is the source and the origin of the love that motivates us in anything that is good. He doesn't motivate us in the murder and the plunder and the cruelty, but the things that are good. And so when we look at our own wars that are not physical, national, or international wars, we have wars that we have to fight in our own lives. And this is where we lay down our lives for our friends in our own spiritual lives. And we do fight a war in that arena. And it's different, obviously, than a conflict, a national conflict, but it is a war nonetheless. And so we're told that when we are in a state of temptation, we are actually in a state of battle. We're fighting against evils and falsities inside ourselves to overcome them. And Grant asked the question about talking about delights. How do we overcome our delights? Well, I agree with him. Where is he? We could say all sorts of things. So one of the things about overcoming delights is that we often don't really want to do that. I'm not good either at just overcoming my natural delights. But we don't have to, we do that as if of ourselves, and we have a tremendous battle of temptation in the process. But really it is the Lord who is fighting that battle for us. And he fights that battle for us because of his love of the salvation of souls. So we look at this passage, for example, that Jehovah or the Lord fights and overcomes the devil present with a person when that person is involved in the combats of temptation. And even though it appears to us that we're doing it, still it's comforting to know that in actual fact the Lord is doing this for us. And so when we talk about laying down our lives for our friends, in a sense what we're talking about is bringing ourselves into harmony with the Lord himself. And that's really what he wants. And we're going to go into that a little bit more detail in a few moments. But we are asked to follow in his word, to do as he did. And he laid down his life for us in a very painful, physical, violent way. And we know we don't have to do that. We don't have to be crucified. We don't have to go to war in order to lay down our lives for our friends. But we do have to lay down our lives for our friends. And so we turn to the Lord for help in doing that. And the Lord himself in this passage is called a man of war. He is used to fighting these battles. So does someone want to read this passage? A volunteer? Or I can find one. Kara? Oh, sorry. I didn't see you there.
The Lord is called a man of war, primarily because when he was in the world, he fought alone, that is, all by himself, against the hells, which at that time were for the most part open. They were attacking and attempting to bring under their control all, without exception, who were entering the next life. The reason why the devil's crew, that is, the hells, were prowling around in that way then, was that the divine passing through heaven, which was the divine human before the Lord's coming, was not powerful enough to oppose the evils and falsities which had increased so enormously. Therefore the divine was pleased to take upon himself a human form and make it divine. At that time, through the conflicts to which he allowed himself to be subjected, he cast the devil's crew into the hells, shut them in there, and made them subject to the heavens. Also, at the same time, he restored the heavens themselves to order. These conflicts are the primary reason for calling the Lord a man of war.
Thank you. So, when the Lord asks us to lay down our lives for our friends, and he's broadening that from a natural life in a necessarily violent way, we can also broaden his laying down of his life. So the passion of the cross, the last of his temptations, is the literal laying down of his life for us. He died on the cross so that the human race could be redeemed. But that was not all he did. The crucifixion itself and the resurrection of the Lord the crucifixion was the last in a long series of battles or temptations that the Lord went through during the entirety of his life. So we are told that Abraham in the Old Testament represents the Lord as a little child. And we go back and we read through the book of Genesis and then see its explanation in the Arcana Celestia. And there we see the Lord, even as a tiny child, beginning to go through these temptations and these battles that would characterize his entire life. And so he's asking us to do the same thing, to bring our lives into harmony with his own life. And he did that because he came into this world to save the human race. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any point in doing that. So he was motivated by his life. And when he took on the human, what we call the Mary human, that humanity that he took on was the same as our humanity. And it had the same limitations and inclinations towards evil and pretty well everything else that we had. So he had to fight against selfishness and greed and arrogance and pride You name an evil, he had to fight against it. In fact, his humanity allowed the evils of hell to draw near to him and inspire him with a desire to do these things. And the only way he could meet them was to draw on his love, his willingness to face those things, fight against them from his as of self, until eventually he defeated them. And then he was glorified. And that glorified person is, of course, the divine human. So when we think of the Lord and his actions in the world, we are thinking about what he did, and how do we mirror that? How do we put those teachings into our own lives? And we are told that we begin with honoring the Lord himself. And so the story in the Gospel of Matthew, a lawyer asks him, what is the greatest commandment of all? And he says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. That's the first one. And the second one is to love your neighbor as yourself. And then on those two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So we have these two things, and the images that Grant put up there of loving the Lord, the spiritual love, loving self as the natural loves, are reflected in these two great commandments. And so that is how do I put it? Obeying those commandments is the process of laying down our lives. So we looked at this passage earlier on, that people don't know what love is. How do we lay down our lives? How do we love other people and bring our lives into harmony with the Lord? What do we have to do? I mean, it's one thing to talk about these in high terms. It's another thing to look at essentially the nitty-gritty and figure out what is it that we have to do. So, working on the assumption that a lot of people don't know what love is, we turn to a dictionary, and we find that love can be used in two different ways. It can be used as a noun or a verb. As a noun, to love another is very much to be romantically and sexually attracted to them, to have strong feelings or liking a friend or a person or your family. That is an extraordinarily superficial definition of what love is. I was kind of horrified to find that in a dictionary, and it just proves the point that people don't know what love is. And then we could turn it around and turn it into a verb, and to love is to have a strong affection for someone, which can be combined with a strong romantic attraction. So for a lot of people, that's what love is. So when we talk about the Lord's love for humanity, heaven forbid us from thinking that he wants to get romantically involved with us. That's not the sense that the heavenly doctrines use to describe divine love. And while those definitions are important in our own daily lives, because we do have romantic inclinations towards people, we're supposed to have those things because that's the beginning steps of the development of conjugal love, which the Lord very much wants us to have. But we have to move beyond that, and we move to true Christian religion, where we are given some definitions, much more useful definitions of divine love. Will someone read this passage? Oh, by the way, interrupt me if you want to. I'm quite new to it. Mark.
Oh, that was an interruption. That was a volunteering.
Oh, yeah, no, that's right. So I was calling on you to read.
TCR 28. It's so far been shown that God is one, and is the very and first being of everything, and that all things which are come into being and subsist in the universe are from him. It follows from this that he is infinite. But although these things can lead the human mind to acknowledge that the prime entity, ens, or the first being, esse, is infinite, it still cannot know its nature, and therefore cannot define it except as the total infinite, subsisting in itself, and thus the very and sole substance. And since nothing can be predicated of substance without form, That is the very and sole form. Yet where does this get us?
Right. So we could talk about love in so many different ways, and if we don't know what love is, that's a wonderful question. Where does this get us? How do we love our neighbor and lay down our lives for him? If we're not going to do that in a state of war, which most of us aren't, how do we do it? And yes, we have temptations in our lives, but we have to sort of figure out, well, what is the process of that? Why is fighting against something inside myself an act of loving someone outside of myself? How does all that fit together? And so we go back to the Lord as our model. The Lord we are created into the image and the likeness of the Lord. And we're also told that every step of our regeneration is a human version of the Lord's glorification. So just as the Lord showed his love and gave his life for all of humanity, from the moment he was a young child right through to the passion of the cross, so we have to do that as well. Easier said than done. Now we have to put that into practice. So what I'm going to do now is try to take the idea of love as it's described to us in the heavenly doctrines and see if we can put some sort of practical, useful flesh on the bone, so to speak. So my favorite passage defining love comes from the True Christian Religion, number 43. I'll go back to this passage over and over and over again. When I perform a premarital counseling program for people who want to get married, I like to start with this. And I've used it in funerals, and my theologues are very familiar with it coming up in classes. It's just such a useful description of love. And it's very simple, which means that we can build onto it from other parts of the heavenly doctrine. So we're told that there are two things that make up the essence of God, love and wisdom. All right, now we're familiar with those. God created from love by means of wisdom. Love is his motivation. Wisdom is how he does it. And because his love is perfect, his wisdom is perfect. And therefore everything the Lord does is perfect, expresses it. Now what we get in terms of the Lord's wisdom is the human end of that divine wisdom coming down through the heavens and resting in the Word. And that is where we learn the teachings that are going to allow us to develop the loves inside ourselves that are going to be harmonious with the Lord's love. So we're told that there are three things that make up the essence of love. One is loving others outside of oneself, or other people. We can't love without loving other people. There's no such thing. I mean, yes, we can have a love of chocolate, but there's still some object that we're loving. We cannot have love without an object. The second one is wanting to be one with them, to have some sort of relationship with them. And then the third one is the whole purpose of it, devoting oneself to their happiness. So what I want to do now is to take these three essences of love and look at them individually and see how they apply, and then look at what do we have to do in our lives that we have to lay down in order that we might love others who are different from us, who are not us. How do we establish that relationship, be one with them, and how do we devote ourselves to their happiness? So those kinds of loves are those essences of love are the cause of all things. These are the reasons why the Lord created. The Lord created because he wanted to love. Well, he didn't want to love. He was love. He's pure divine love. But he needs an object. And in order to have an object, he needed someone outside of himself. And that's where we come in. So the Lord created beings, us, as if we were separate from him. Now, I stress the as if, because technically we can't be separate from the Lord. All our life comes from the Lord. We wouldn't exist if we didn't have the Lord flowing into our human internal and giving us life. It's like the electricity flowing into a light bulb. We have to have it in order to live. But the Lord has designed us in such a way that in having this life within us, we have this complete and utter sense that we live from ourselves. We can't feel his life flowing into us. We can't feel strings attached to us that are attaching us through the heavens to him himself. And if we could, then there wouldn't really be any point. The Lord made us that way so that we are able to respond to him. But I'm going to come back to that in a moment. Looking at the definitions, in TCR 43, it continues to say that the first essence, loving others outside of oneself, is to be recognized in God's love towards the human race. On this account, God loves everything he has created because they are the means to an end. And his end was a heaven from the human race. One of the most important chapters, I think, in the writings is the second chapter in the book Divine Providence, which has as its title, the goal or the end of creation as a heaven from the human race. And the whole book about divine providence is how the Lord fulfills that end, how he brings us from being born with inclinations towards evil to becoming an angel in heaven who is in a reciprocal relationship with the Lord himself. And that was his end, and because that was his end, he was willing to come into this world and undergo the process of glorification, which at times, as we know, was difficult. It was challenging. He sweated blood. He was crucified. He went through all these battles as if of himself, feeling that he was doing it himself. We're told that when the Lord was in these battles, he could not feel the divine life flowing into him. Just the same way as we can't feel the divine life flowing into us. If he could feel it, he would say, well, I don't have to battle because I'm divine. And so it wouldn't have been a real temptation, and the whole process would have been pointless. So the Lord acted as if of self. And his end then was the salvation of the human race. And he calls on us to act as if of ourselves. He's created us to appear to be different from him, separate from him, with our own will and our own understanding. And we have the ability to develop that will and understanding through the course of our lives in this world. So everyone and everything in the universe are other than God, because they are finite and God is infinite. And God's love goes out and extends not only to good people and things, but also to evil people and things. That to me is yet another comforting teaching that the heavenly doctrine it gives to us. The Lord doesn't only love us when we're angels. He loves us when we're not angels at all. He loves the evil spirits in the deepest hells as much as he loves the angels in the highest heavens. Doesn't mean that he treats them all the same, because love isn't necessarily treating everybody exactly the same. In some sense, well, let me rephrase that. He does treat them the same. He's constantly trying to lift them up to a higher, more perfect position. And why it looks like he's not treating them the same is the angels cooperate and the evil spirits don't.
I can remember telling my kids, because I'm sure I've been told this plenty of times, that I'm to love the good in another.
Sorry, say that again?
That I'm to love the good in another,
yes,
rather than their evil bits.
Yes.
And I was just reflecting on what you just said about loving the devil in the deepest hell, just as much as the angel in the highest heaven, who is filled with good, and the other one has very little good.
Right.
How does that work or square with the loving the good in another?
Well, technically, the loving of the good in the devil in the deepest hell is loving their internal, their life, which in its very being is the ability to become good or receive good and become wise. And even the worst devils have that ability.
Right.
The problem is they choose not to exercise it. And so the Lord is constantly trying to reinforce that by lifting up, it says, the evil spirits to a milder hell, where they're not going to be quite as evil as they were down at the bottom. And because of that, some people have thought, well, you can get out of hell. And actually you can. The Lord would love to bring everybody right up out of hell. But he doesn't do that, because he also, as part of this whole process, gave us the individual freedom of choice. And that means that we have the choice to be selfish, greedy, and all those horrible things. And the Lord respects that. That is one of the greatest of his acts of mercy, is that he makes it possible for us to have choice, and therefore he allows us to reap the consequences of it. So evil spirits could be brought up, and the Lord is doing everything in his providence to lift them up, but they don't want that. They want to go down. And not only do they want to go evil, but they want to become more evil. And then they're not allowed to become worse than they were in this world. So they're constantly frustrated. So sometimes people say, hell, yeah, everybody's happy in hell. No, I don't think so. It's the happiness of being constantly frustrated and angry and so on. So his love extends to good people and to evil people, and consequently not only to people and things in heaven, but also to people and things in hell. Not only to Michael and Gabriel, but also to the devil and Satan. So loving the Lord is looking at people as if they were totally different from himself. And he's designed us in such a way that that's how it appears to us. Then he respects the choices that we make in our daily lives. Now, we are born with inclinations towards evil. Doesn't mean we're born evil. We're not born evil. We're born with inclinations that if there wasn't something to interfere with those, we would just grow up to become evil, because we'd make choices that fed those inclinations, and gradually we become more and more self-centered until such time as we find ourselves with the people down in hell. So one of the biggest problems that we have, if we're going to lay down our life for our friends, is what is this life that we're going to lay down? And one of it then is we've got to lay down that life of ourself, or as I often prefer to call it, selfishness. I use the term selfishness rather than rather than love of self, because love of self has, again, as Grant pointed out, it has a positive purpose. The Lord created the love of self to serve, so we can be ourselves, and that makes it possible for us to serve the uses to our neighbor around us, and by doing that we serve uses to heaven and to the Lord himself. So love of self in a positive sense is the bottom of the degrees of love that we have within us. The Lord's not asking us to lay that down, because that's the foundation. And so if we look at it from an what's the word I'm looking for? If we look at it from an unregenerated, unreformed perspective, that love of self is a rotten love of our own being. And I prefer to call that selfishness, to differentiate it from a healthy love of self. There is no good selfishness. The love of self can be good, selfishness not. So look at the definition here. Another volunteer. No? All right. I'll read it. Oh, Fritz, there you go. I didn't see you.
Love for ourselves is intending benefit only to ourselves and not to others, unless it is in our own interest, having no goodwill towards the church or our country or towards any group of people or any fellow citizen. It is also being good to the church, our country, and other people only for the sake of our own reputation, advancement, or praise. So that unless we see some such reward in good we may do for them, we say at heart, what's the use? Why should I? What's in it for me? And forget about it. This shows that when we live a life of self-love, we are not loving the church, our country, our community, our fellow citizens, or anything worthwhile, only ourselves.
Thank you. So it's the nature of selfishness to focus everything in on ourselves. It's the opposite of laying down our life for our friends. It's the process of building us up. Now, that doesn't mean we're not going to have interactions with other people, and those might on the surface appear to be good, but they're not motivated by good. They're not motivated by the love of the Lord or the neighbor or uses. They're motivated by these selfish loves where everything is turned inward onto ourselves. And when we do that, other people become a means to an end. In a sense, we dehumanize them. We take away their purpose. We reduce their loves and their wisdom, such as it is, so that it can be subordinated to our love and our wisdom. This is the problem with evil. It is the exact opposite of what the Lord did when He created us. He created us so that He could be present with us and fill us with loves and affections and delights and fulfill our lives. And so He's constantly looking at us and our benefit. But when we are in a state of selfishness, what we're doing is we're denying that to other people. We don't really care what they love, unless providing they're serving us. We don't care what their affections are or what their delights are, unless we can use them. And if we can use them, then we're all too happy to provide the delights of someone else for our own ends. Perhaps an extreme example for of someone like this might be a drug dealer. A drug dealer wants to make money. So he sells drugs to people. It gives them a momentary state of being high or whatever the effect of the drug is. But then it wears off. And now the drug dealer is not really concerned about that person's well-being or what's going to happen to that person when they get addicted and how they're going to break the addiction and so on and so forth. He's not interested in that. What he's interested in is the money that he gets. So those people out there are dehumanized. They're just simply a means to an end. And the end is his own self and his own enrichment. So when we look at selfishness, what we're seeing then is this state where we're denying the difference of other people. We can't love other people if we don't see them as other from ourselves. So that leads us then to what's going on here. Apologies. There we go. So that leads us to laying down our love for our friends. How do we do that? One is taking that first essence of love into account. It's recognizing the difference in other people, recognizing them as images and creations of the Lord, and that their individuality is a key part of that. That the Lord created a huge variety. There are 7 billion of us or so in the world, and have been millions and billions before that. Every single person different from every other person. Every person having their own feelings and perceptions and thoughts. And we're told that no two are alike. And so it's within that huge range that the Lord is able to create variety, create perfection. But He can only create perfection by acknowledging their variety. So this is a challenge for us. We, in trying to lay down our lives for our friends, recognize our friends as people. They're going to have their own loves, their likes, their dislikes, their habits, the way their mind works or doesn't work, and everything else that goes into making a person to be a person. So the to love others outside of ourselves and lay down our lives for them is in actual fact that recognition. So when we do that, what are we looking for? And this comes back to Mark's point here. We're looking for the good in another person. Since therefore every person is the neighbor, and people display an infinite variety, and each of them is to be loved in the neighbor as the neighbor in accordance with the good in him, it is clear that love towards the neighbor has genera and species as well as degrees. And now, because the Lord is to be loved all else, it follows that the degrees of that love are to be measured by love to Him. In other words, by how much of the Lord, or what is from the Lord, He possesses in Himself. For this is a measure of how much good He possesses too, because the good comes from the Lord. So when we are recognizing people as individuals, we're going to see them in a huge number of ways. Some of them are going to be total strangers. Probably the vast majority of people in this world are total strangers to us. We don't know what's going on in their heads. We don't know their lives or anything about them. So how do we love them? Well, we have to look to the good. What good we can see in that person. How do they behave? Are they considerate or inconsiderate? If they're considerate, we can count that as love and be supported and lay down our own lives by being considerate back, overcoming our selfish state to want to manipulate their considerateness and use it to our own advantage. If we get to know them a little bit better, we start understanding how their minds work, so we can start finding other ways of finding good in them. They may be considerate on one level, but as we get to know them, we find that they're honest brokers, and they don't lie and cheat and steal, at least as far as you can see. And those are things that we can support in our neighbor. So when we come down then to laying down our lives, what we do is we support those things in the neighbor, and we overcome in ourselves our own sense of a tendency to lying and cheating and stealing. Not that we do that, but that's an inclination that all people are born with. And so when the opportunity arises, we turn away from it. We can also love our neighbor by building them up and focusing on that good that exists within them. So the important part of the first step, or the first essence of love, is to love other people. And if you think about it, the New Church really teaches a community. We have community in our church organizations. We have community in events like this. But on a higher level, when you think about it, every single angel is in a society. And that society is their spiritual home. And every group of societies is in a heaven. And every heaven is part of a kingdom. And every kingdom is part of the grand man as a whole. So the Lord didn't create people to be isolated from each other. He created them to live in community. And this is something we find challenging in Western society, where there's a strong emphasis on individuality at the expense of community. Individuality is very important, because each one of us is an image and a likeness of the Lord. And we are created to be individuals, and we have to be individuals. But we have to subordinate that individuality for the greater good of the community around us, which sometimes means saying no to certain things in ourselves so that we are able to support others. So that's the first step in laying down our lives for our friends. The second step then, the second essential, is to build relationships. So the second essential of God's love, who's wanting to be one with others, is recognized in his partnership with the angelic heaven, and with the church on earth, and with everyone in the church, and with everything good and true that forms and constitutes an individual and a church. So the Lord there is forming this partnership, or the conjunction, the relationship between him and people. And this is the whole point of recognizing other people as individuals and loving them. Well, why would we do that? Because we want to have a relationship with them. And that relationship might be as superficial as letting someone go through a door first before you, rather than just elbowing them out of the way. And it can be right down deep into the essence of conjugal love. It goes on all those different levels. So when we are loving them as individuals, we can enter into a relationship with them. Some relationships are going to be deeper, others are going to be less deep. But I love this term here, partnership. In other passages that we've read, the Lord calls us his friends if we love one another as he has loved us. Friendship, partnership, being in a conjunction, that's just a wonderful idea, that we can have that kind of relationship with the Lord. And it's also a wonderful idea that the Lord calls on us to have that kind of relationship with each other, so that we're working together. And again, the only way to do that is to lay down our lives for our friends. And that means laying down or trying to eliminate our selfishness. So we come back to that same point. Creating a relationship comes back to the idea of seeing others as people outside of ourselves. It's very difficult to have a relationship, a genuine relationship, with someone that we think of as simply an extension of ourselves, who's just me in another body, and I can use and manipulate that other body just as I use and manipulate my own body. That's a very unhealthy relationship for one person to have for another person. So it comes back again, to lay down our lives for our friends is essentially to lay down these states of selfishness within us, and in putting them aside, looking at the good and the truth in the other person that we can serve. Not that we can use, but that we can serve. It's an outward-looking thing rather than an inward-looking thing. And when that happens, we're able to build a relationship with them that exists on different levels in our lives, but at the same time goes down to the core of who we are as people. Because as people, we are working to eradicate the barriers to building a relationship. So now we come down to the third essence of love and laying down our lives. And the question there is, or the statement there is, the third essential of God's love, his blessing others from himself, is recognizable in external life, which is the unending blessedness, good fortune, and happiness that God gives to those who let his love in. And so the third way we lay down our lives is to look for these things. How, we ask ourselves, can I fit into this picture of being a blessing to others? How can I give them or assist in their good fortune and contribute to their happiness? And we do that in our lives, in many different ways, depending on our relationship with other people. The reality is that we can't do that if we are focusing on self. So we come back again, over and over and over again, to this concept of selfishness that can consume us. And selfishness is the process of turning everything in on ourselves. And when we do that, we can't be a blessing to other people. We can't contribute to their happiness because we're denying their humanity. We're turning them into beings who can be manipulated for our own personal good pleasure. And so, by definition, we're not going to be able to be a blessing. So if we can learn to put that selfishness aside, then we can come into a state where we are contributing to the blessing of another person's life. And one of those things then is to reflect the Lord's love for us. The divine providence, and this is the passage that I mentioned earlier, has as its end a heaven for the human race. This is why the Lord created us, to be happy. Everything he does for our happiness. And so is it possible for everything we do to be done for someone else's happiness? And he does that because heaven is conjunction with the Lord, that connects with that third essence of love, that second essence of love, to have a relationship with other people. And the Lord did that by forming us in such a way that we can do that. Now, we can't form other people. People are people, and we can't do that. But what we can do is we can look at our relationships with people and look at ways to conform those relationships, at least on our side of the equation, so that it brings a state of happiness to them. And we do that by doing good to them. So this is the opposite of doing the selfishness. Selfishness is manipulating everything inwards. Doing good is looking outwards and being a blessing to other people. And the writings tell us in the same passage that the more closely a person is being conjoined to the Lord, the wiser the person becomes. So we're going to lay down our lives for our friends, and it takes wisdom to do that. Now, I have a lot of deep feelings on the subject of wisdom. I think often we don't define it right. A lot of times wisdom is defined by how much we know. And there's an element of that. You've got to know something to be wise. But really, if you go back to the Lord himself, he is love itself expressed by means of his wisdom. He created from love by means of wisdom. So this whole process of creating us into his image and his likeness is actually his love being expressed in his wisdom. Now we, on the other hand, when we lay down our lives for our friends, particularly in putting selfishness aside, become wise. It's wise to lay down our lives. It's wise to look for the good in other people. It's wise to find ways of serving them. And it's wise to find ways of making them happy. And the more we do that, the wiser we become. In other words, the more we do these, the more we love our neighbor, the more ways we're going to find to love our neighbor. In other words, that love is going to find new ways of expressing itself. And so the person becomes wiser the more closely conjoined they are to the Lord. And then the next point is that the more closely a person is conjoined with the Lord, the happier he becomes. And this seems to be counterintuitive sometimes. If I'm not really looking out for myself, no one's going to look out for me, and I'm going to be miserable. I'm responsible for my happiness. Yes, to a degree that's true, but our happiness is not just looking at our happiness. We become happy when we are serving other people and serving the development of their happiness. This is the essence of the angels in heaven. It's the essence of the second commandment the Lord gives us, which is to love your neighbor as yourself. You have to love yourself because otherwise you'd be useless in this world. But we do that in order to we do that in order to love our neighbors. So we become wiser. We become wiser and we become happier. We be more fulfilled. Going back to Maslow's development, we think of the bottom level of looking after ourselves. But as one moves up all the way up that level, you get to the top level, and if I'm not mistaken, I think he calls that an actualized person, where everything is focused in on the person and they're fulfilled. And that's what the Lord wants for us as well, to get all our different levels of life, all our different relationships to the point where they are serving the neighbor, where we're laying down our lives and we become happier. And this is why the angels are happy, because they have laid down their lives in harmony with what the Lord did. And so sometimes people say, well, okay, if I had to rearrange my life like that, so I'm laying down my life for my friends, where's my life? Where do I fit into this overall picture? Who am I, And so we can have a sense of nervousness that somehow we're going to just disappear and lose our identity. And this is the last point in this passage. It says, the more closely a person is conjoined with the Lord, the more distinctly does he or she appear to himself to be their own person. So we feel more and more alive. And this is the gift that the Lord gives us. As we lay down our lives, he gives us a new life. And that new life is a life that enriches us from within. It is the life of heaven. It's the life of loving our neighbors without restriction or reservation, not loving them for their person, but loving them for the good that is within them, and being able to see that good within them and act accordingly. And so what happens is that our life becomes richer and fuller, the life of heaven. And so the promise then is that if we look at these these three essences of love: to love others outside of oneself, to want to be one with them, and want to make them happy. And we look at that as a model for how to interact with other people. Can I recognize the individuality of another person? Can I see them as someone who's not me, whose thoughts are not my thoughts, their feelings are not my feelings, and their actions aren't my actions? And there are going to be certain things in there that might seem to be barriers, but within that, there's got to be some good. And the Lord says, look to the good in the person and love that, because that is their individuality, rather than the selfish route, which is to make them expressions of ourselves, to manipulate them, and to subordinate them to becoming just pale images of us, something that serves us. So that's the first step. The second step then is to build relationships. Relationships are key. There is no love without a relationship. We have to have it. And we're designed to be in relationships. We're designed to be a part of a community, because you can't serve a community if you're not part of a community. As soon as you have another person that you're interacting with, that's a tiny little community, but it's still a community. And so heaven is made up of all these communities that we call societies, and people, and so we're called to have that, or to develop those relationships. And then the third one is to be a blessing. A blessing, in one sense we could say that blessing is another word for happiness. The Lord brings happiness into our lives, and can we then bring happiness into other people's lives? Not necessarily superficial happiness, like giving them sweets or chocolate, but think of the teaching that a wise judge, an honest judge, will send a guilty person to prison, and that actually is an act of charity. It's an act of love. So love has to take its forms and be presented in accordance with the opportunities that are there. This is not a Pollyanna kind of love. This is the kind of love that mirrors and matches the Lord's. He recognizes us, and He's conjoined with us, and He blesses us. And so when we come back to our theme, and we lay down our lives for our friends, this is the life that we are laying down. This is the life of our selfishness, the life of our evil proprium, the life that forms the barriers between us and the Lord, and between us and other people. And every time we feel one of those barriers, it's useful to reflect on, well, why do I feel that? Am I treating this person as someone in their own right? Am I looking to build a relationship with them, or am I writing them off? Am I trying to be happy with them, happy for them or with them, or am I cursing them? Those are the barriers that would lead us into discord with other people. We lay them down. We cast them out of our minds. And frequently, going back to the beginning, that can seem like warfare. That's the states of temptation sometimes that we have to go through to get there. Because we have to deal with situations and people and things that might be challenging to this concept. We might not like everybody in our lives. Then what do we do? We might have to deal with people in situations that are disturbing to us. Then what do we do? What is the best course of action to follow? And the course of action, of course, is love. Love is following the teachings of the Lord and laying down our lives and doing what we firmly believe the Lord teaches us to do. So that is some hopefully practical understanding of what laying down our lives might mean. And any questions?
Well, I think this applies very much to interpersonal relationships of one person to another, or one person to a group of people. Yeah. But in my professional career, I had to do a lot of dealings with politicians, and they have to measure the public good against the individual good. I'll give you a couple of examples. There's a national housing shortage in the UK, and people need houses as a public good. On the other hand, those houses have to go somewhere, so that they're sited in a particular place in people's countryside, and they're treasured open space, there's more traffic congestion,
Yeah.
etc. Or the country needs more power lines
Yeah.
or power infrastructure. People need that infrastructure to provide the electricity they're using. But nobody wants a load of pylons right across the countryside, quite close to them.
Right.
And that sort of dilemma applies, say, with the conflict between public expenditure and people's welfare benefits,
Mm-hmm.
making sure we're not spending more than we can afford.
Right.
So, from personally, my own sort of professional experience, I kind of find those dilemmas very difficult.
Yeah. Yeah. You probably run into something the Americans called NIMBY.
Yeah.
Not in my backyard.
Ultimately, though, it's always for the greater good, isn't it?
Yeah.
All right. So whatever, doesn't matter what the problem is. If you work for the greater good, for the love of what's going on,
Right.
you will eventually come out on top.
Mm-hmm.
But there's always sacrifice
Right.
on that. All right. Because that is what it is about. It's about sacrifice. Your own sacrifice. You might have to sacrifice you having to have a pylon here for 100 other people to have the electricity. And it's putting that across. Right, that's the important thing, hence this type of lecture. More people have this type of lecture, the more they understand what they are as part of a community, the greater good, what nationhood is all about and things like that. This is why people can lay down their lives in a war situation.
Right.
They might not know anybody within their country, but their nationhood identity is of that.
Right.
They believe that the people that they are fighting for, although there are idiots amongst them, as we all know, but for the greater good, they are better people. So they can lay down their lives for that sort of situation and do it sometimes, I think often, with joy. You do hear people say it was the thing I had to do before they die. It sounds silly, but it is. They know what they're doing.
Yeah.
All right?
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't, but they seem to do it anyway. So that greater good is the important thing.
Yeah, that's so that loving the neighbor is the same as charity, basically. They come from the same word. But they're levels of charity. So the greater the good, the higher the level. And, it's not all that difficult to love individuals in a room. But once you start getting up into communities, country, church, that takes a lot more wisdom to balance those things out. But there also, I think, in those times, there's also perhaps greater danger. We know that someone who's running a program that affects an entire community might have their own agenda that they're trying to push through at the expense of everybody else. That's not loving the neighbor. So I think it's applicable on all those levels.
I wonder, I was thinking about people who are having to perhaps defend people who have done something which is we understand to be intrinsically evil. I mean, how do you see the good or love that person when perhaps that perhaps you're not, I don't know whether you can really believe that person is innocent, that but in my own life, I sometimes have to do things which I think this is not the right thing, but I have to do it, because of external pressures.
Right. So, in my mind, that brings us back to the old conundrum of love the sin, hate the sinner. So, certain things, behaviors and things like that, or the sins, we have to deal with those. The sinner as the perpetrator doesn't mean we have to take them. We can still look for what's good in them and as far as possible forge a relationship and influence their lives to the good. It's not always easy to do that because it's very difficult, in my mind anyway, to distinguish between sin and sinner. The sinner does the sin. And the sin makes the sinner a sinner. So it's very hard when, in a sort of like the kind of situations you described. And then it comes back, I think, to the community, to the greater good. Is the sin that a person's doing, the thing they're doing wrong or malevolently or something like that, is how much damage is that doing to the community as a whole? So who's the first responsibility to? And I think that comes back to your point. The first responsibility is going to be to the highest level. As you get love of the individual, love of the community, love of the country, love of the church, love of the Lord. Those are the degrees of charity that exist. And so if there's a conflict on one of them, I think you have to look to making sure that you're serving the one above. If you can change that, then well and good. That's great. It fixes on that level. But if you can't fix it on that level, the one above it. At least, I mean, say for example, you have a teacher in your school who does something egregious. What is the response? Well, depending, the response might simply be to fire the person. There's not necessarily a lack of love. For one thing, you're supporting the rest of the school, which is a greater community. But then also, you go back to the teachings about justice and things and judges, that it's useful for people to reap the consequences of what they've done. Doesn't mean you don't love them, it just means that is the consequence of an action or a series of actions. And that calls for thought, and that's a challenging thing to do. And I think the challenge for us is to make sure that we don't let our own propriums and our own, self-interest in things interfere in those. That's the laying down of the life for our friends and doing the right thing for them without that kind of interference.